Strictly for the Birds by Lindsay Stewart. My name is Mason and I have a pretty wife and 2 children. At least, I had a pretty wife. Now I have only the 2 children. They, thank God, were too young and innocent to comprehend fully the real horror of what happened in a park in North London last Sunday week. My wife, Elizabeth, now lies in a hospital in Epsom, her face distorted with fear and disgust. They tell me she screams a lot, even in the daytime. They tell me she'll never be pretty again. We used to live near Regent's Park Road. We've moved now, away from Primrose Hill, away from any park, from any birds. Of course the children don't understand any of this, or I don't think they do. "Why can't we go and play on the swings now, Daddy?" they ask. I can never tell them. "Is it because of that man, Daddy?" they ask. I always make some poor excuse, but I think they notice the beads of sweat on my forehead. They notice that I can't look them in the eye anymore. It's a pity that they should have learned to sense evil so young. Many of us go through life without ever having to admit that there is real evil in the world until perhaps one is shaken by some appalling crime beyond human comprehension. For example, take Christie. Even so, you forget the whole thing until such an evil touches you personally. Then you can never know peace again. This is the story of how my wife found madness and how I learned never to sleep with my eyes shut. Every Sunday afternoon my wife and I and the children would walk down Fitzroy Avenue, along Regent's Park Road, skirting the gates of Primrose Hill, to the zoo. After we'd made our customary rounds of the elephants, the goats who ate our hats and gloves, the tigers, the bush babies, Tigger the lynx, Goldie the eagle, and the snake pit, we'd let the children play in the sand, on the swings and seesaws at the foot of Primrose Hill. Harmless enough, you might think. How could one imagine that on Primrose Hill every Sunday afternoon with the sun playing among the crocuses, such a repulsive rite was performed? You'll find it hard to believe what I am about to tell you, but it's true. I know. I was there. In fact, I saw it many times. I even joined in, at least until I realised. But let me give you a clue. Have you ever noticed how fat and healthy the Primrose Hill pigeons are? If you have, score 1. You're halfway to evil. We'd been in the park many times before we noticed this old man in his wheelchair, in the valley. The old man was always covered in blankets, wore dark glasses and odd plastic gloves of a peculiar pattern. I thought then that perhaps he had some skin complaint and that the gloves protected his frail hands from the sun and wind. His face was rather pitted, his complexion sallow and wrinkled. Of course my wife noticed him at once. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon the old man would be wheeled through the gates by a tall dark man of about 40. They would always rest in one place, the valet standing stiffly behind the chair, the old man fumbling with a bag of what appeared to be breadcrumbs, his toothless mouth miming soundless words. Then together they would feed the pigeons. Both of them had noticed my wife and me. The old man tried to smile at the children a few times. His red tongue flapped about in his mouth, as though he were desperately trying to say something to them. "Poor thing," my wife observed. It was some weeks before we actually approached the old man. I had sensed that something was wrong, though I didn't know what then. I tried to stop my wife from going near him, but she merely said, "Pooh," to me. The valet didn't seem to welcome visitors and discouraged conversation with his silence. The old man smiled. My wife talked about the weather. Then he handed her the white paper bag, indicating that she should feed the clustering throng of pigeons around his chair. She threw a handful of the contents to the birds, and they all rushed towards it, fighting and flapping over each tiny morsel. The crumbs were rather green, very soft and crumbly, like rotten cheese. My wife grimaced when she touched it. It was slimy. With a lift of her eyebrows she asked what it was that the birds were gobbling so ravenously, but the old man only flapped his plastic-covered fingers and crowed with delight. The valet gazed into the distance and said nothing. Then he turned the wheelchair round abruptly and pushed the old man out of the park. Although on subsequent Sunday afternoons we all helped the old man to feed the pigeons, I was invariably reluctant. I don't know why. I began to notice that he seemed to be shrinking a little. Old age? Senility? Some curious disease? I don't know. For instance, on the last Sunday in May, I noticed that a corner of the blanket which covered his legs had slipped. He had only one leg. Poor old boy, said Elizabeth. There must have been something so terribly wrong that they had to operate. A few weeks later, the other leg also had gone. After that, we watched him from a distance. Perhaps we couldn't bear to see him crumble away completely, the victim of a mind and body destroying fungus, some parasite eating his limbs day by day, spreading a slow death wherever it moved. Perhaps it was the smell of him. It lingered in the air when he had gone. Or perhaps we sensed in our inner minds that something sickening and ugly was taking place. Could it have been that? On the Saturday night following the incident of the legs, I heard my wife moaning in her sleep. She would fumble with the sheets, cry out a little, turn her body over and over in her bed. I put my arms around her, trying to comfort her. She mumbled something about arms, repeated it several times as though she were desperately seeking an answer to a question. She woke up very suddenly, about 4 a.m, crying. I pulled her to me, asked her what was wrong and kissed her. She shivered in my arms, shook her head and fell asleep. Next day we saw the old man again. My wife seemed obsessed by him. This time she went to him and peered at him closely. He had shrunk a great deal. He seemed to be half the size he had been before. Elizabeth could see black sockets behind the glasses. His arms were wrapped in bandages, strapped around him, covered with a shawl. This time there was no crow of delight, no flapping of fingers. No fingers. The old man was a lump of bandaged rotten flesh, limbless, eyeless. Suddenly he said something in a low crackling whisper. The only words Elizabeth had ever heard from him. He said urgently, "Feed them, feed them." The valley said, "Go away, don't interfere, he's very ill." My wife ran back to me, pausing only to look behind her and see the attendant produce the usual large paper bag of evil-smelling crumbs for the pigeons, who fought wildly around the chair, perching on the back and arms. After that, Elizabeth's state of mind deteriorated rapidly. I took her to our doctor, who gave her some iron pills and told her she needed rest. She took to sitting in an armchair in the corner of the room, fumbling with her fingers, picking at a piece of thread from a cushion. She said very little, answering questions in a monotone. I meant to take her to a psychiatrist of my acquaintance in Wimpole Street. On Sunday we went to the park as usual. I didn't want Elizabeth to come with us, but she insisted. The children were playing happily on the swings. Elizabeth sat on the bench, gazing with utter concentration at the entrance to Primrose Hill. I was reading the colour sections. When I looked up from the magazine, she had left my side and was standing 50 yards in front of me, facing the gate. I think she was talking to herself. My watch told me that it was 3 o'clock. This time, only the valet came through the gate. No wheelchair. No old man. Only an umbrella and a bag of crumbs larger than usual. I think I knew what was coming, when my wife turned to me and screamed at the top of her voice. The valet dropped the bag and fled, the soft green fleshy crumbs spilling onto the grass.